my channel. In today's video, I'm going to take a break from my planners and work on one of my side projects, which is slowly drawing and logging the pens in my collection. So this is something that I've been working on for the last while, and I have no target end date in mind. I've just been chipping away at it when I have a few minutes, and it's happening in no particular order. In some cases I've drawn out the pen but added no information. In other cases I've drawn the pen, I've colored it in, and left it at that. And today I was thinking about working on my Sailor Pro Gear Slim line friends. And for this one, I decided to also draw the nib because, if you weren't aware, it has the cutest, I don't know if I can get that to focus. So that's what I'm gonna do today, and I'll be honest, I don't really have a lot planned to talk about today, so I thought we could keep it casual and I could tell you a little bit about what's been on my mind this week. One that I might talk about today is the ink that is actually in this pen currently, which is Lennon Toolbar Sesame Oil. And I just want to say I absolutely love this ink so much. It's very similar to Oyster Hour, which is an ink that I really love. It's this ink right here. I really love this ink in swatches. It's a beautiful ink, but I find that it is very dry, and in terms of writing with it, it was an unpleasant experience with Oyster Hour in my EF Sailor nib. I have been testing it out in broader nibs, so I have it in the Sailor Pro Gear Slim. I also tried it in the Brass Sport. I got a broad nib. And I also tried it in my Pilot Vanishing Point in a medium nib, but I did forget to write my experience down here. So it's more pleasant to write with in a broader nib, but it's very unpleasant to write with in this extra fine nib. So I'm finding that when I get an ink, if it passes the pleasant test in my EF Sailor nib or my Decimo EF nib, then it is an ink that I'm likely going to enjoy in all of my pens. So I find this is my most temperamental pen, and since then I have tested a few other inks. I find Inaho is great, Goose Poupon is great, Ginza Gold Sepia, which is a Kobe ink, is wonderful. Antique Sepia was not the greatest. Lady Rose Ferris Wheel Press was also not great. I don't have it written down here, but I really disliked Lady Rose when I had it in this EF nib. I recently got a sample of Sailor Kobe Shioya Vintage Sepia, which is this was a really wonderful ink to write with, but comparing it to Writing Desk, I realized that they're quite similar, so I don't think I'm gonna get a bottle of that. And then Lennon Toolbar. I have to confess I was totally influenced by Yoseka Stationery. They spoke so highly of sesame oil. It got me very excited. I put myself on their email notification list, and I resisted the last two restocks until the most recent one. At that point, I really wanted to try the ink. I hadn't been able to get a sample of it. I love sesame oil. The very little bit of research I did on this ink seemed like people generally really loved the ink and the brand Lennon Toolbar. So I bought it, having never tried a sample, put it in my most temperamental pen, and I adore it. It is, I guess, a wetter ink, and it does, every time I write with it, I feel like I can smell sesame oil because it's one of my favorite oils to put in my food. So I really love it. And anyway, today I'm going to paint this drawing of this pen. So typically what I've been doing is I've been trying to use inks that I already have to paint or color in the pens. And I don't really have an ink that matches the coloring on this pen. It's kind of like a pinky brown. So it's a little more pink than Oyster Hour and Sesame Oil, but it's also not a pink. So I have picked a couple of inks that I'm going to see if they might work if I mix them together. So I've got samples of Birmingham Penco, ceramic kiln, and rotted cork. I don't know, it feels like this color is kind of somewhere in between, so that's one mixture that I might try. And then the other two that I might try as well is mixing together Oyster Hour and Lady Rose, because Lady Rose is kind of, okay, so this is a different type of paper. This is the Traveler's Notebook blank insert, which I think is Midori plain paper. This is Oyster Hour, so you can see it's kind of similar but not really, like it's more brown. And then I don't know where Lady Rose is right now. For some reason I can't find it. Oh, and this is Lady Rose. So it's quite pink in large swatches, but I'm wondering if I mix this and Oyster Hour together, I'm wondering if maybe that might get, although as I look at this together, it doesn't really quite seem like that'll work. So anyway, we'll try it out, and then we'll see about rotted cork and ceramic kiln. And otherwise I might have to play around with the mixtures before I paint this on. Let's give it a try. I find that I need very, very little ink to color this in. So just to reduce the likelihood of contaminating the inks, I do have some of these, I'm not sure what they're called, pipettes I think, and these came with my Dominant Industry inks and they have come in so handy. So I'm going to put a few drops in here, and we'll just use my A6 to test out some of the swabs, even though it is a slightly different color. And I also have Robert Oyster Heart of Gold, which I plan to use for the gold trim on this pen. I did use Robert Oyster Heart of Gold in my Parker 45 drawing, and it's a little dark, but I think it looked pretty good. The other color that I could potentially use is Sparkling Champagne, which is this, but that feels a little bit too light. And then the other option is Bookkeeper's Brass. That's another option, but I am leaning towards the Heart of Gold. So let's see if we can figure out this brown color first. And it might take a little bit of color mixing because I'm not the greatest at color mixing in the first place. So it might take me a bit of time to figure it out, but let's see what we can come up with. Okay, so first of all, let's just see the colors on their own. It's Lady Rose. This one is Rotted Cork. I think that one is Ceramic Kiln. And this one is Oyster Hour. Wow, that is a lot more yellow than I thought. I think I'll try these two, Oyster Hour and Lady Rose. So we'll have to see how that dries, but I feel like that could potentially work. It might be a little bit off. Let's just see what happens when I mix these two together. So a little bit of time has passed and I feel like these two colors just are not working at all. And this one's actually looking the most promising. It might be a little bit off, but I do think that I'm liking the combination of Lady Rose and Oyster Hour. So I'm glad that I tested that out first. And now I'm gonna keep this here so that I can continue referencing this. Can't be too precious about these things. It's just a cute thing. And I believe the whole thing, oh, interesting. So this part is actually a little bit darker. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm glad I double checked. So maybe we'll start with this here. And I do find that fountain pen ink is a little difficult to work with just because it dries so quickly, which I guess is a good thing when it comes to writing. But as a medium to paint with, it definitely takes some getting used to. So what I find helps sometimes is I wet the surface a little bit, just so that when I add the ink, it distributes a little more evenly. I have no idea if that is a good approach or not, but that has been helping me manage this a little bit. So I do feel like maybe this isn't quite right in terms of the color. So I might have to come back to this after it's dried to see what it looks like. Now I'm just mixing a couple of other colors to see just to see if I can get this looking a little bit darker, because it is slightly different. All right, it's a little off, but I am going to let that dry. I feel like it's a little bit too brown. Okay, I'm gonna leave it for now. I'm gonna let this dry, try to ignore the fact that it kind of bled over the page, and see what it looks like dry, and then I will come back and possibly make some adjustments to it, or maybe I'll work on the gold trim and try to figure out a game plan for these lighter pieces on the end. So I will be back in a bit. So it's going to be a little bit of lower lighting, but this has had time to dry, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm actually pretty happy with how this color turned out. I'll have to look at it again in the daylight to see. I think this looks a little more purple or a little more pink compared to this, but considering all things considered, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm gonna stick with this color. And now I'm gonna work on the gold trim. And as for this light pink, I think what I'm gonna try to do is use the same mix that I made for this pen, but I'm gonna water it down. And I'm gonna see if I can get something light, like a light color effect, and we'll go from there. But first I'll do the gold, and there's some gold trim on the bottom here, so I'll do that, and then I'll let that dry, and then I'll come back and I'll do this pink part. I have this wrapped in plastic to see if I could avoid having the ink dry, and I am going to grab a little bit of this Robert Oyster Heart of Gold. This one is a shimmer ink, so I'm going to mix it around a little bit to try to get some of that shimmer, because even though I don't need the shimmer, I think that'll be a nice addition. Try to take as little as possible. I want to talk a little bit about why I'm enjoying this particular project this year. Earlier this year, I did a video about long-term projects, and I talked about my Hobonichi 5-year, which I still keep up. And what I really like about projects like that are the fact that they are time-bound, so there was something that I could focus on every day. It's capturing a moment that represents each day of the year for 5 years. And while my pen log isn't exactly time-bound, there's a lot of similarities with it that bring me a lot of comfort. The main thing is that it's a very mindful activity because it keeps me in the moment without worrying so much about the future. It's a project that feels very structured. I can see many steps ahead of me before I can finish the project, and all of the steps are ones that are manageable and I feel confident that I can do. So I've minimized the amount of worry that could come with a project like that. I know that my intention is to draw all of my fountain pens. I know that my intention is to eventually color them in. And I also know that my intention is to log every ink that I use with that pen. So over time, I can have a really nice record of what each ink looks like in the pen that I've inked it with. And because it's the kind of project that isn't really designed to have an end date, it kind of eliminates my need to feel like I need to rush through it. I have this tendency to hyper-focus on a project, and I think that's why I tend to gravitate towards really big projects that are low in complexity. So I never really thought about my journal as a project, but I've been keeping daily journals for years, and I've always kind of looked at journals as books that stay with me for a really long time. So last year when I picked up a notebook, it was the Kurosawa notebook that I put in my traveler's notebook. I went through those pages so quickly, and because I could see how close I was to finishing the notebook, that motivated me to more frequently, because I could see how close I was getting to the end of the book. And in a weird way, that kind of warped my sense of timing, and it was like I wanted to fast forward using that book, and I just wanted to get to the end because I could see how close I was. And when I finished it after 3 months, I felt like I had barely had time to really cherish the book, if that makes sense. So when it comes to my journals, I do look for really chunky books. Like the current one I'm using is the Sterling ink. I think it's 520 pages, because I was hoping that it would last me for at least a year. And I can understand that that gets boring, and I can understand the value of switching through inserts because it just keeps things interesting, and in a way it can feel like a fresh start frequently. I don't know what it is, but for some reason I like how big projects force me to slow down, I suppose. And I feel like I've lived most of my life rushing through things. I would call myself an impatient person. I always want things right away. I always want to finish things as quickly as possible so I can move on to the next thing. And in a lot of ways that has served me well, but in other ways it has fueled my anxiety, because I can end up often with this feeling like I'm driving a car at top speed and the brakes don't work. That is something that I feel often when I feel like I'm running too fast. That was something that I struggled with a lot in a few of my last roles, because everything always moved so fast, and I think in some ways I was more productive when I had really quick timelines, and I got a bit of a thrill keeping up with a fast pace. But in my personal life, I'm gravitating more towards projects that take time. I had put this pen log together. It was intended to help me stay engaged with my pens. I worded it as dating my pens. Being able to really study the pen in order to draw it, being able to experiment with different inks and really get a chance to test them and play with them and learn more about what works and what doesn't work. All that stuff is really fun, and there is no end date. And I think that is really helpful for me, because when it comes to schoolwork or some of my consulting work, there's always a deadline associated with it. There's always a deliverable. There's always something to work towards, and I completely understand why. But I think in my personal life, there's room for balance, and for me, that balance has been slowing down, finding an activity that I can be really intentional about, and structuring the activity in such a way that I minimize the amount of anxiety I might feel with it. Because I know exactly what is involved in this project, I have a sense of how long certain tasks take. Because of that, I'm able to time manage my engagement with the activity a bit better. So instead of me tackling a big art project where I know that I could potentially lose an entire afternoon hyper-focusing on that art project, in this case, I know that it's unlikely that I'll lose myself for hours into it. And that is comforting as well, because if I happen to have a spare hour or maybe even less at the end of the night and I want to do something creative, this is a place that I can go to. And I know with certainty that I can put it down, and I know exactly what is involved. And that certainty piece is also something that really resonates with me, because since I do struggle with anxiety, and in my case it tends to be a lot of worrying about the future and worrying about uncertainty, and sometimes the two together. With a project like this, I don't have those worries. I get to have a break from worrying about the future, and I get to have a break from worrying about uncertainty. That's all that I have for you today. I'm curious to know what kind of activities you reach for or engage in when you're looking for some downtime or you're looking to recharge and restore yourself. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around. I do have a few fun videos that I am working on in the back, and including an update on our bathroom makeover. It's pretty much done. It just needs some final touches, I guess. And those are the things that I struggle with the most. So like all the big things that I wanted to do, those are all done. But I hope you are doing well. I look forward to having a conversation with you in my comment section, and I will see you soon in the next video.